Hi, everyone. Thank you. Yes, this is my first presenting job for CS, so I'm very excited. And I'm particularly excited today because we've got a panel, and I always enjoy panels because we get to hear a lot of the real stuff and not a bunch of necessarily sales stuff. So today we're talking about innovation and cloud constraints in regulated industries. And my motivation for putting this panel together was that I've been through a lot of these pains before. I don't think they're talked about enough. And I really wanted to get some of the experts in the field together so that more people could hear about these conversations. So today we've got Mark Schwartz, Barbara Eder, Jonathan Haines, and Carl Brown joining us. But before we get going, let's get into a bit of a structure today. First, a few bits of housekeeping. There is a code of conduct that we adhere to all our meetings. And I think Teresa will be putting that into the chat now. Thank you, Teresa. This meeting will be recorded and placed on a YouTube channel. So if that's a problem for you, then please be aware of that now. And by continuing to attend, you are implicitly agreeing to that. Yes, and if you have any questions during the panel, please drop them into the chat and they'll be passed to me. We also have some questions that came before submitted before, but we really encourage side discussions in the chat because it's a really good way of getting that interaction that can be harder to get online than in real life. So yeah, that's the housekeeping, I think. So then we're going to have some announcements, and then we'll get to the panel. So first, I want to draw your attention to the Cloud Native Transformation book that O'Reilly published and was written by the founders of Container Solutions. You can get a free copy at the link there, which I think will also be posted on the channel. And in there is a lot of things we're going to be talking about today. So how to break down this massive problem of how you make change in these hard to navigate organizations. We do lots of events at CS. They're all available on our website to look at, but just drawing your attention to a few of these. First is the WTF is Cloud Native Operations, CNO, which is being hosted by Penny Resnick, one of the founders of Container Solutions, and Michael Muller, who also works at Container Solutions. And this is all about how you update your operations for the new world of cloud native. And that's on July the 8th at the same time as this panel. And then we have another event. What is SRE for managers? So there's a lot of stuff to talk about in the technical side of SRE, but also there is a lot of understanding that needs to be communicated to managers about SRE, because again, it involves changes to the way we work and how we operate. And I think we'll be talking about some of those things today as well. So that's in combination with our partner Cisco, and that's again at July the 15th, same time. And finally, as many companies are at the moment, we're hiring. So we're looking for engineering managers and senior cloud native engineers. So if you see, if you're interested in joining us, then please look on the website and the careers. We are all remote now, so anyone can be remote. We like to have, we have hubs in the various locations there. So we still have offices you can go to. But we're remote friendly, as most businesses have had to be over the last year. Okay, so that's the housekeeping done. So let's get going with the panel. Teresa, do I need to continue sharing my screen, or should I stop doing that?
You can stop that. Yeah.
Okay, I will stop sharing. Otherwise, we'll be staring at that the rest of the time. So yeah, I'd like, oh, hi, Barbara. I see you're there. Hey, good to see you. Good to see you. So I thought, likewise. So I thought we'd start with intros from everyone, and I'll try and go in alphabetical order if I can make that work in my head right now. So Barbara, would you like to go first?
Yes, good morning. I'm Barbara Eder, and I live in Toronto, Canada, and very happy to be here to share my experience regarding digital transformation and observations in large enterprise organizations across North America with respect to cloud.
Thank you, Barbara. And I think next alphabetically is John.
Hello, afternoon everyone. John Haines, based in Norwich, UK based. So I've been a product owner in sort of large organisations, owning the engineering delivery for public cloud platforms for about 5 years now. So sort of meeting the competing needs of security, capability and cost. I suppose I sit on that boundary between maybe agile and the traditional interfaces of an organization, where I'm technical enough to understand the architects and engineers delivering the platform. So you derive the right product, whilst also sort of more traditional sort of PM type skills from the delivery focus side, and also engaging with the customers, understanding application journeys onto that platform. So.
I feel John is being too modest. He's actually made serious changes within organisations from the trenches. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from John today.
Public cloud is it's more of a business change than a technology implementation. But yeah.
Exactly. Thanks, John. Kyle.
Sure. Hi, folks. I'm Kyle Brown. I'm from Raleigh, North Carolina, in the USA. And I have been a senior technical leader for a bunch of large-scale cloud transformation projects across a number of industries, both financial services, travel and transportation, retail, you name it, for more years than I want to think about. So let's just leave it at that.
Thanks, Kyle. And Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Schwartz. I am an enterprise strategist with AWS, Amazon Web Services, which means that I work with senior executives from large enterprises on the non-technical aspects of digital transformation, whatever that means, and the cloud. Things like cultural change, organizational structures, organizational politics, governance models, investment strategies, things like that. Before I joined AWS, I was the CIO at US Citizenship and Immigration Services in the Department of Homeland Security. And before that, CIO of a company in San Francisco and CEO of a small software company. I've published 4 books on IT leadership sorts of things, including the most recent, The Delicate Art of Bureaucracy, Digital Transformation with the Monkey, the Razor, and the Sumo Wrestler, which Ian is holding up. And that one too.
So yeah, I'm a big fan of Mark's work, and I borrowed heavily for the plan for today's panel from his book, The Delicate Art of Bureaucracy. So I'm big on plugging his work. Okay, thank you very much, Mark. So I thought we'd start by asking a question that's on my mind to the panel, which is, and I mean, you may not agree with me, but aside from general talk about culture and high level talk about business change, the details are rarely discussed. And I'm wondering why these things are not talked about more. I don't know who wants to pick that one up first.
I'll throw one out that's a little bit controversial, but we find to be true in every large financial services client we talk to. They don't talk about these details because they don't want their competitors to know how far behind they are.
Yeah, that kind of corporate imposter, I call it corporate imposter syndrome, exists everywhere. And is that something, Barbara, I see you're nodding your head.
Yeah, having also can relate to large enterprises, in particular financial institutions. And very often, yes, it's not, they don't want to talk about it because they don't want to air that dirty laundry and convey that they actually are eating crackers in bed. And very often they also don't know. They don't know and they don't understand. Again, coming at things from a strategic perspective and working with a lot of executives, this really brings to the forefront the culture, where the culture is at, where the processes are at, the organizational silos that exist, and therefore the behaviors that exist within the organizational silos. So a lot of these details beyond the technology are not well understood yet. And so through this process, through this modernization journey, a lot of these things now come to the surface, and now we have to deal with them.
I was wondering, Ian, what kinds of details are you thinking of that don't get discussed?
Well, so in your book, you talk about, you even go into the point of talking about specific forms you had to deal with when you were working for Homeland Security, and some of them were quite ironic, right? So some of them were designed to reduce paperwork, but were correlated with a doubling of time spent on paperwork.
Yeah, that's probably doesn't really surprise anybody. That's the way bureaucracy tends to work. Well, I work mostly with senior executives, right? CXOs and boards of directors. And I expect them to talk about things when they have business results to announce, right? So, you know, they're not going to be talking about technical details in general, but for example, Moderna, which developed one of the COVID vaccines, they're happy to talk about the fact that by moving to more agile ways of working and moving to the cloud, they were able to speed up their drug development pipeline and correlate the results of a lot of simultaneous experiments in a way that let them move forward faster, with the result that in just 42 days after the coronavirus was sequenced, they already had a drug ready for phase 1 trials. So at that level, I do hear companies talking when they have an actual concrete business result that they can tie to the cloud migration or the new ways of working. And I wouldn't expect anything more detailed from them, which is why I sort of asked that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I'm not at the CXO level of large scale enterprises yet. Maybe I'll get there one day. But I was thinking more about, you know, you go to a tech conference and everyone's talking about this technology or that technology. And of course, yeah, everyone says, oh, it's really about culture. It's really about the higher level problems. But then it kind of stops. And there's very little deeper thinking than that, is what I was thinking. And actually, this leads on to another point, which is that something I've got to be in my bonnet about at the moment is money flows within organizations and how they affect the way that companies operate and how hard that can make change. John, I'm looking at you here because I know that I know from our working together before that getting money for your project is the really hard thing, not necessarily only delivering it.
Yeah, you've got to be funded. Obviously, in the context of a shift to public cloud, a lot of the benefit is gained elsewhere, and it can be perceived as being an infrastructure delivery within a large organization, deliver me cloud, whereas in fact it's a whole organizational change. So you also need to sort of bubble up the cost in other areas such that they can make the changes that they need to make as well. They can train their staff, they can change application architectures, rather than it being all focused on infrastructure and then we'll do these other bits. So the parallelism isn't there, and the federation of money into the right areas at the right time doesn't necessarily happen as you need to, because you don't have that. You need that overall program wrapper around it, because it's an overall company change. You need to approach it that way, or you don't get the results that you want necessarily.
Mm-hmm. That's absolutely true. One of the things that we've seen is that in so many transformations that we've witnessed, it's the first mover that bears all the costs. So they're the ones that are going to be responsible, for instance, for all of the tool purchases or all of the initial public cloud purchases. And everyone wants to hang off of them, but no one wants to contribute to that overall program. And you're absolutely right that it takes a program level view to be able to make the money amortize itself over all the different projects that are going to happen over a long period of time to make this work. You can't just let traditional project funding approaches try to deal with these multi-year modernization projects.
Yeah, I find there are a couple of things that are holding companies back. One is not just that the results are often outside of the IT organization, right? So you need to take that holistic view. But even some of the business benefits are very hard to put a number on, especially if you tend to think in return on investment terms, because then how do you gauge the return on investment of risk reduction, which I think you get dramatically by moving to the cloud, for example, or agility. You don't know how you're going to use the agility, but clearly it's valuable to the business to have it. So there are those challenges in making a business case, vetting a business case, and all of that, because the biggest bang for the buck is really coming from those kinds of things or changes elsewhere in the organization. Then a second thing is, with our digital ways of working, one of the great advantages and one of the great risk mitigators is that you can move incrementally. And you can actually make funding decisions incrementally. You can do staged investments in projects, see how they're going, adjust course, all of those wonderful things about agility. But businesses haven't really figured out how to do governance of their investments when that is a benefit. And the initial investment, I mean, let's say moving to the cloud, right? How big a risk is it to move to the cloud? You can just move a small amount, you can pull it out again, you can change how you're using the cloud. There are so many different things that you can do along the way. But if your governance model is still set up to do a multi-year project with a big investment and improve the entire thing at the beginning, then you're going to have a harder time making a decision to go forward.
Yeah, that's actually what I'm interested in, is just the funding cycle problem. Very often when we deal with customers, we make some changes, at a lower technical level, and then we ask the 5 whys questions, and we end up looking at accounting rules within the business. So I wanted to ask about funding cycles. I've only ever seen really yearly funding cycles in large-scale organizations. Has anyone seen anything different?
I've seen an acceptance that it is a multi-year program of work, but it still has to fit within the yearly funding cycle and those constraints.
Right.
And along with that,
I'm sorry, I was going to say the decisions are often still made on that cycle, but the execution, the management of costs is rapidly becoming more of a continuous thing, especially with the cloud. So approaches like FinOps increasingly are the thing that makes sense. You want, I always tell CFOs and CIOs that they need to be working together continuously, not just, annually getting together and deciding how much is in the IT budget. It's really a question of continuously reviewing these incremental changes and what you want to do incrementally, and managing your costs in the cloud on a granular ongoing basis with the responsibilities possibly distributed to the technical teams and so on. So very different model, I think.
Yeah, if your infrastructure function is funded at the start of the year and the application teams have funded that, they aren't funded to accept then an infrastructure bill, be it variable or not, for the next year or two coming from cloud in parallel as they're doing a migration. That has to be catered for at a higher level within the organization to allow that shift. Otherwise, the application teams are paying the bill twice.
And it has to be done on sort of this continuous basis, right?
Yeah.
It can't just be a periodic decision.
Yeah, we've got some questions coming in from people, which one of which caught my eye, which is, do we have MBA programs churning out leaders who expect to ask, when will it be done by, how much will it cost, what exactly will I get? Instead of how urgent is it, how much will it make, what change will it make in the world? Is it the leadership that's at fault? And the nature of the leaders that we have?
So I think all leaders can learn. I mean, that's the mark of a good leader in any industry, is that they are continuously learning and continuously adapting. So I don't think it's necessarily the mindset as described in the question that's at the issue. It's really the boldness and the ability to do, as Mark was just discussing, this kind of change to a more continuous model, a model that doesn't require you to think in terms of fixed time increments, but do a more continuous adjustment of your goals, a continuous adjustment of your costs, and a continuous adjustment of your expenses, is a bit different than is often taught in some MBA programs. But at the same time, good MBA programs are going to be teaching you to think. And I think that's the real attribute that you want to be looking for in leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen, John, I think I've seen you try to translate agile ways of working to a more traditional structure. I've seen you doing that at work, and it was quite time consuming and took a lot of energy from you, I think. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I suppose in a more traditional set, a senior leader is used to saying, I would like to make this change, I would like to move in this path and this direction. But as already been touched upon, there is a certain inertia within an organization. There are certain structures and constraints. There are, regulatory, things that have to be adhered to, risk and control. These things exist, and they are effectively, you're trying to build your speedboat, but that's a bit like dropping an anchor out the back. And in order to understand that and understand why the drive for change that you've enabled at a senior level isn't happening the way you want it, you have to immerse yourself a little bit more in the detail as to what's going on within your organization. And if you aren't driving the change into all the areas in the same way at the same time, you won't necessarily get what you want. So it's not that necessarily the question is wrong or the drive is wrong. It's the understanding of where the blockers are in an organization are perhaps in a different place that then inhibit the move that is required and requested.
I like the phrase immersion into detail from leadership. I see Barbara was nodding. Is that something that you've observed?
Yeah, again, it's something that I've observed, and it comes back to the detail, because as you move to cloud, what it does is it takes the overall operating model and it literally turns the Queen Mary on its side. And again, it brings to the surface the investment plan, the cultural behaviors, the processes, and the significance of moving to new agile capabilities with a vision, and a leadership team that is partnering beyond their domains of control, but across their domains of influence. And at the same time as we are moving this speedboat forward, we are trying to demonstrate KPIs, key performance indicators, and value to senior leadership that what we're doing is actually worthwhile. And so again, I iterate, it brings to the surface the cultural behaviors in the organization and the new capabilities that have to be embraced within an organization and a new organizational design, and still trying to demonstrate where we're actually gaining value and bringing that to the business, and that's not simple. It's not easy.
I would almost reverse that in a way. What I sometimes, first of all, I have to admit, I do have an MBA, and I understand where that question is coming from for sure, and I don't know the answer. Sometimes when I'm talking to a senior executive at one of our customers, they'll ask me something like, how do I measure the results of the cloud or the digital transformation? How do I measure the results? And to me, that's a very revealing question, because to me, the value is based on what you're trying to get out. You know, what hopefully the cloud is a tool, and you're using it to accomplish something. And if you don't know what the something is, then it's going to be hard later on to justify the cloud. You know, the justification should be that you're accomplishing what you want. So if, for example, you're going to move to the cloud so that you can use machine learning because you want to reduce fraud or something like that, success means you've reduced fraud. You know, or if it could be a more technologically focused thing. If your availability is terrible now and you want to increase your availability, then did you increase your availability? You know, and all of the execution is going to flow from that goal. So I think my message to MBAs, which I think is in the terms that they would understand it, is success depends on what you're trying to accomplish, and that's what you should be measuring afterwards. But make sure you go into it with an idea of what you're hoping to accomplish.
Absolutely. The point you just made is, I think, the most critical point about any cloud adoption that has to be made. One of the things that I've seen so often is, especially infrastructure teams, and to a lesser extent, development teams, look at things from the purely technological standpoint. But what happens is, as you kind of walk them through the question of, well, why are you adopting cloud? And you start asking the 5 W's question and start, you know, working your way down through that. It always comes down to, for both cloud and agility, that you're trying to do things more rapidly. You're trying to make teams be able to deliver software more quickly. You're trying to be able to do it in smaller increments. None of us will debate that from a software engineering perspective, that's a good idea. But that's not the right question to ask. The right question to ask is, well, what is that going to give you from a business perspective? Because where we see this disconnect is they're getting to the point that they're becoming more agile, but the business itself is not coming up with new ideas in a more rapid pace and is not able to take advantage of that agility because there wasn't that connection between the two halves. And so you're right, you can't turn it upside down. You always have to start from the business first and then figure out how to achieve the technical goals from there on. Yeah.
Yeah, pushing that even further, I would sometimes I'll be talking to the CIO and I'll ask, what's the business imperative? And they'll say, like, what do you mean? And I'll say, what is the CEO telling you he or she wants? Or what is the board saying? And if we don't know what that is, then it's hard for me to advise you on how to do your transformation, right? If you tell me what the CEO is telling you right now you need to accomplish, then I can tell you how to map that into transformation strategies. Often, I can do this mind reading trick sometimes, you know, when they don't know, I'll say, I bet your CEO is saying you need to grow. Because that is essentially the imperative for most organizations, because the capital markets love a growth story. Your stock is valued higher if investors can see that you're going to be growing. So there's almost always pressure to grow. And then you see the contradiction right away when at the same time there's pressure to cut costs, because you're going to have probably going to have trouble growing when you're cutting costs, or at least if you're primarily thinking about how to cut costs, then you're not thinking about how to grow usually. And it's often my work is in resolving that dilemma, saying, well, if you want growth, how do you plan to get it? Well, here are some ways that we can support you in doing that, or here are some ways to think about it. But you do have to understand that we're talking about variable costs here, so that as you grow revenues, your variable costs are probably going to go up too.
Yeah, that's something that comes up a lot in big and small transformations that we do, is that the cost of this work is extremely front loaded. So you have to do a lot of architectural work up front, which is very expensive and appears to deliver very little business value at the start. And it's like you build the warehouse and then you have the warehouse for 10 years. Building the warehouse is expensive and time consuming process. Mark, you work for Amazon, you'll probably know a little bit about that. But the warehouse doesn't actually get you any business benefit until it's operational.
Yeah, I guess I want to push back on you on that one a little bit. Compared to the waterfall world where you really had to architect everything in advance and had to plan the project and all of that, then you didn't get results for a long time. I think that if you're doing digital right, if you're making your architectural decisions at the last responsible moment, not too late, but at the last responsible moment, and insisting on incremental results right away, then you should be showing results in 2 weeks, which you never could have done in the waterfall world. Usually I sometimes act like a CIO when I'm talking to the customers, it's like, this is what you got to do because I'm the CIO around here. I will say, first thing you got to do is make sure you're comfortable with your security posture. Don't do anything until you're comfortable with your security posture, but then start producing results the next day, and when I say results, I mean actual stuff that's deployed. Could be minimum viable products, it could be low-hanging fruit, whatever, but start showing traction immediately.
Yeah, so I'm interested in this whole question of security posture. I've seen organizations spend months and months deciding what they do and do not trust in the cloud. So the idea of spending 2 weeks showing improvements in 2 weeks feels difficult.
Well, for let's say a large regulated company in a regulated industry, it's not going to be 2 weeks till they're comfortable with their security posture. But I think the models are well enough established that we should be talking on the order of a month or two. Usually it takes longer than that, I've found. But the debates shouldn't be on a theoretical basis. The real question is, what is your security posture going to look like in the cloud? And then the next question is, how does that compare to your security posture in your own data center, comparing apples to apples? And you should start moving to the cloud as soon as your security posture in the cloud is at least as good as your security posture in the data center. I know that it's going to wind up being infinitely better, but you don't need to wait until you're perfect, which you will never be in security. You need to wait until you can improve your security posture by moving into the cloud. And my contention is that that comes pretty quickly, actually.
One thing to point out also is, even with respect to my colleague from AWS, cloud does not necessarily have to equal public cloud. I mean, even AWS has outposts. And so a lot of times what companies can do is if they're taking a hybrid approach, they can start to learn some of the lessons from other parts while they're still working through some of these issues. I mean, there's one bank I'm working with. They have 600 and some odd separate audit rules that they have to deal with. That just takes time to work through. If we're going to move to the public cloud, yes, they have to work through those through all of their public cloud providers that they're dealing with. But at the same time, they can make substantial progress with an on-premise hybrid cloud, using OpenShift, using Outpost, using, any of the products from Google or, Microsoft, to learn those harder lessons about dealing with brownfields, about breaking things up, about delivering productivity improvements and delivering business value quickly, they can start to learn that while they're working through the security posture. And then that way, when they're ready with having, the right number of those 600 some odd audit rules signed off on that they can start deploying into the public cloud, they'll already have gotten some of the lessons learned and some of the things applied to do that. You don't have to do everything all at once, is what I'm saying, is you can divide things up and you can do things incrementally.
I suppose there's just to pick up on the security sort of side there's a balance between vertical sign-off of risk and security versus horizontal. In terms of if you put everything on the platform becomes very costly and complex and takes you a long time to get there. If you do everything a vertical application-centric sign-off, you can move quite fast, but eventually you get to sort of an aggregate risk. And because of the shared responsibility model, you end up with this hole in the middle. So you sort of have to do the balance between the two, such that maybe you do a few vertical sign-offs to make fast progress, so the cloud gets a good name, applications prove that they can work, and you have good use cases, whilst building your horizontal platform so you address the more aggregate risk factors as you go. You can't sort of do one or the other. You have to sort of do that blend between the two.
That's something that I think isn't talked about enough, is that, and it leads us to regulations, doesn't it? Because if you're doing a one-off project for a small business unit, a small team within a business unit, then the oversight on that will be much slimmer than if you're doing a platform that 60+% of the business can use.
Yeah.
Not sure I agree. So the model that I have in mind is your security organization defines what the security posture should look like. Let's say that they say those 612 rules have to be implemented or whatever it is. And then you turn to automation, because you can't do 612 rules manually, right? If you really want to have a secure position, then you must automate quite a lot of your security controls and automate your policy enforcement in production and automate your auditing. Auditing as code, security as code, compliance as code, all of these things. And that should apply to every system that you build once you defined your security controls. And ideally, the security organization is also providing automated tests that will test for the presence of all of those controls and test other things that they think is important. And it should just be part of your CI/CD delivery process that you're running those automated security tests and continuously assuring security. So I don't really know that you need to compromise on those simpler systems. You want to have a consistent view of what it looks like to be in compliance at least, and secure.
Just one point to come back on it, Mark, is the balance between where you say CI/CD, so as a preventative control, where I want it so it's like that and it never can get there, versus I accept it could get there, but I want to know that it's happened.
Yeah.
So that means to say one hand is probably infrastructure is building lots of code and then it's got to maintain it, versus the other one is leveraging maybe off-the-shelf products from Amazon on the other hand. But then your security function has to build a reactive team around that. Yep. And accept the fact that might happen. And that's a bit of a cultural change, an operating model change, accountability and ownership change. Mm-hmm. And if you don't get that, you end up with the former scenario of building a front-loaded CI/CD, which is quite difficult to do if you have hundreds of control items to be compliant with. But yeah, it's just I'm not disagreeing. Yeah, it's just that you need that organizational change to be understood at the same time, so you don't end up in that scenario.
And I think we're in agreement there. I would agree with everything you just said. Although some of those, it's not just the preventative controls that are going to be automated or tested for. You can also validate or verify that you're shipping your logs into the SIM, and things like that. There are a bunch of things that are less preventative that you can also verify with your automated testing and have as a standard policy across all the systems. This was a big one for us in Homeland Security, where the Central Homeland Security Organization said, essentially, you must ship all your logs to our super duper, intrusion detection system or whatever. And so we could validate for each system that we were building that it was actually shipping those logs to the right place, et cetera.
And that's a cultural shift sometimes from this kind of audit approach of being able to sign things off ahead of time to a more observability-based approach of being able to verify in real time that things are actually happening. But that's an important cultural shift that you have to work with the CISO and you have to work with the audit teams to be able to make if you're going to be successful with any of these projects. Absolutely. And we moved from a world where we were periodically reassessing the security of our systems. We'd sign a 2-year authority to operate, and that meant in 2 years we were going to check again. And we went from that to only using continuous authorization. We were continuously testing our security in production, and we had a process for triggering remediation immediately if anything went out of compliance. And so back to your original point about hybrid, absolutely, hybrid is, every company is hybrid essentially for at least a period, right? You don't just suddenly move everything into the cloud. But I believe that there are lots of tools that you could be using in the cloud that have to do with policy enforcement in production and things like that are less easily available in your own data centers. And security is a really good reason to speed up that migration in some cases.
Yeah, just as an aside, I'm astounded that I'm always amazed that InSpec, I don't know if people have heard of InSpec as a tool, but it's a code compliant, security compliance as code tool, which I think Chef came up with. And I used it and I was like, why is this not taking over the world?
Yeah,
it seems like a no-brainer to me.
I will sit there and say I've used it a couple of times. So yes, but again, I would still say that the shift is try and do reactive detective controls, leveraging native tools that are now available from the likes of AWS and so on, rather than necessarily doing lots of heavyweight upfront work yourselves if you can. There's a lot more off the shelf now than there was previously.
So there's a couple of things I want to, threads I want to pull on there. One of them is, we've skirted around regulations and security policies. And I know that in some of the organizations I've worked with and for, these policies are extremely hard to question from certain positions at least, and also are seemingly written for a different age. And so you end up in quite surreal conversations about things that simply don't make sense in a cloud native world.
So this is the bit I'm just going to sit there and say this is the bit where you need to be immersed in the detail in terms of senior leaders, because this is where you end up not getting the cloud that you think you want and that you've asked for. It's this detail that senior leaders need to somehow expose themselves to, or empower someone that can cut through that and understands the pivot that needs to happen. So I jumped in there, Ian. So yeah.
Barbara, did you want to say something as well?
Yeah, just exactly. That is totally agree with what John has stated. In large organizations, I've seen it where, full force ahead, and then everybody gets in the room and it's like, all right, whether it be banking, logistics, manufacturing, we now have to get this through security. And everybody's like, uh-oh. And that's where the pivot really needs to happen. An understanding of bringing the culture together to talk, to be able to have the fierce conversations, to understand the journey, to understand that cloud is not a product that we're pushing, that we are trying to move forward on new ways of doing things. And the security policies that are currently being looked at in these large organizations are outdated. And we need to understand in the detail what we are comfortable with in terms of risk and what we can move forward to authorize for the organization to move forward on the journey. So it necessitates understanding the detail, collaborative, fierce conversations where people are being heard and listened to, such that we can move this beyond this perceived block.
Absolutely. Barbara,
Yeah.
could not be, you couldn't be more right. This is a conversation that has to happen with the CISO and the CFO in the room, because in the end, it is a conversation about risk, and risk can be financially modeled and can be determined as to how much the company is willing to, risk on any particular issue. How much is it worth to them? That's why those two people have to be in that room when we're having this discussion, so that they can understand exactly what this means in terms of changing these policies and adopting, let's say, different policies that achieve the same ends and comply to the same regulations in different ways, as Mark was saying.
Yeah, in the case of like auditors enforcing controls and things like that, the magic words are, what's the control objective of that rule? And if you can show that something else is meeting the same control objective, then the auditor generally will be convinced. And that applies to when you're setting up systems in the beginning too, because ultimately that's what they're checking for. There's sort of help available. I mean, there are certain issues that come up a lot in the DevOps world, for example, with auditors and compliance, and there is plenty that's published already on how you can overcome those issues. From the point of view of the CIO, so I was in that advantageous position of being sort of high in the org chart. And what it looks like from there, or from the CFO's position, you're not going to get a CFO to go into the details if you're talking about technical details, right? The CFOs are pretty detail oriented, but they're not, they're going to block out of their heads anything too technical, but you don't need to. What I did essentially from my level was I told my security team, we're going to move to continuous delivery. The development teams are going to push the deploy button whenever they want, yet you are responsible for security. How are you going to do it? And that engages them essentially in solving the problem. And part of what I said along with that is I care a lot about security. I support you totally. Tell me how you can do it, so that essentially, if that's the model, that means that what's sitting in the main trunk of your source control system is secure and vetted, right? So it can be deployed at any moment. And so I said, give me some good creative ideas on how you're going to be able to do that, because that's my goal. So usually from the CXO level, you're working from goals and then trying to empower the people under you to somehow, solve for those goals, let's say.
One item I saw in reInvent was make the CISO responsible for saying yes.
Yes, right.
The answer is yes, but how are you going to do it, in terms of as a collective? So rather than asking infrastructure to deliver it. So, yeah. The soundbite, but yeah.
That's one thing that was the second thread I wanted to pull on there was, we've made an assumption in our discussions, and there is often this assumption that everyone is on the same page and wants these things to happen. Barbara is shaking her head.
I don't make that assumption, sorry, because I've not seen it. I've just not seen it. Yeah.
Those
like
of us
that's
living
Nirvana.
in the real world.
I'm just keeping it real. I love to see it, but yeah, no.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you get a bunch of engineers in the room, they usually agree on what should be done. That we should have more documentation, we should have better process, we should shift left, or we should have more automation. This is never in question. But it's easy to blame the higher levels, because we techies don't have the same pressures that they do, and they don't have the time for the detail that we have. But at that higher level, how do you deal with that challenge when the CEO is saying one thing and maybe the CIO is saying a slightly different thing, and the CISO is saying one thing but doing another? How do you deal with that?
I often get asked by leaders, how do we deal with the frozen middle? You know, middle management. I know that I want a transformation and the engineers want a transformation, but somehow the middle is getting in the way. And my answer is, I bet you are setting incentives wrong. I bet you're still holding middle management to their old definitions of success, because in that case, they're going to resist change. The responsibility of leadership is to reset those goals and expectations and definitions of success in a way that's going to support the transformation that they want. If it's senior leadership that is getting in the way, then I've written a few blog posts around how to drive a change from the top, from the middle, or from the bottom up. And the basic principle is that you are going to deliver to those leaders what they really want, even if, you know, despite themselves, basically. So you're looking for revenue growth. I'm going to deliver you revenue growth. You know, you can complain all you want, but I'm still going to get you that revenue growth, and then we can discuss, you know, whether we're doing things the right way. I've sold moving to DevOps to business unit leaders by essentially saying, you know how in the past it's taken us like a year to give you anything valuable. Would it be okay if we give you something valuable in 2 weeks? And then, you know, that often you ask us to do something, we give you back something, and you say, that's not what I wanted at all. Would it be okay if your team actually sat with my team and made sure they did the right things? Would that be okay? And here's a dashboard to measure the business result that you want. How about if right now we schedule a meeting 2 weeks from now and I can show you how the numbers have moved on your dashboard? It's a very compelling sales proposition, you know, if you actually control enough of execution to make sure that you can deliver on that kind of a promise.
That last one in particular is really valuable. I've seen multiple times where you can just start from their OKRs, and then you can build a dashboard and show incrementally, look, we've got a little movement today. We've got a little more movement tomorrow. We've got a little more, and just show that trend over time is going in the right direction. And that's immensely convincing to those that are, let's say, a little more reticent about this.
Yeah, I'm nodding vehemently because what we often do, for instance, in banks is that we will move to the wealth guys, and the wealth guys, they're cowboys. They're very much wanting to move forward. You're laughing. They want to move forward with change, like, great, but just make it work. Allow me to make money. Don't stand in my way. And so I was also nodding vehemently in relation to the incentive model. In a lot of organizations that I walk into, we want to do these transformative journeys across these siloed verticals, and what really is getting in the way is the incentive model. The executives are incented in the silos. So I think if we revamp the incentive model, because a lot of people are motivated by money, not everybody, but let's understand that if we realign the incentive model such that it's in everyone's best interest to move forward on these tactical and strategic objectives, and we can demonstrate that we have actually delivered value to the business, i.e. in banking through wealth management, where we have done iterations and we can demonstrate key performance indicators, attach them to a dashboard, and guess what? Suddenly the rest of the business is like, wow, we delivered X, and you just want to foster that energy and get more people on board with that energy of success, but also an understanding that if we do fail, we fail fast, and it is okay to fail. It's okay to fail because we pick up and we move forward. We learn and we understand, and there's cross communication on our learnings.
That point about failure, I think, is critical. It's something we preach to our customers almost from the first moment we talk to them. There is, I was going to state it as a fact, but what is the organization's we've seen attitude to failure? and can that be changed?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In a lot of organizations that I've moved into, it's really not accepted. It's stated, but it's not inherently accepted in the culture. In other organizations that perhaps are I don't want to say smaller, but in my observation, that's usually the case. It's like, we fail fast, that's okay, that's cool. And that would include, investment boutique industries. But in the larger organization, it's not readily accepted. It's stated. And so how I have seen some large organizations work with it is that we'll partner with the business, let's say in a financial institution, and we'll partner with a product owner, and we will deliver very quickly with the product owner. But what happens is that that cycle of business becomes a silo in the organization relative to cultural behaviors and processes. And then we have the broader organization still continuing on the way it has been accustomed to moving product change forward. If that makes sense. So it's like we've created individual organizations where we've got an agile product moving forward very, very quickly, and the rest of the organization is still carrying on the way that it has. And so it's not totally embraced, but the reality is we have to embrace those individual silos, and we have to partner and work with that energy and have a consistent leadership and team cross-communicating on the success of that failure and delivery of the successful product. But it's tough in organizations of 70 to 100,000, where a lot easier in, let's say, a boutique wealth firm, smaller organization of 10,000. Just my observation.
I wonder if it isn't partly simply a linguistic problem, because when we say fail fast, we don't really mean fail fast. What we mean is if you're going to do something that's going to take a big investment, break it down into a small piece and then check that that small piece actually works before you invest the rest of your money. That's really what we mean by fail fast. It means try ideas, but instead of committing fully to those ideas, make them prove themselves out quickly. In other words, it's a risk reduction technique that we're talking about. Fail fast is risk reduction. We sort of combine it in our heads with have a portfolio of innovations because the risk is low. You can try more innovations, but really I would no CFO ever wants to fail, right? That's, in fact, they're paid, that's their job, is to make sure that they're a fiduciary, for the board and the shareholders. Their job is to make sure that the company doesn't fail. But actually, this is perfectly consistent with their mandate. And in fact, fail fast is going to reduce their risk, and CFOs love risk reduction. So another way to present it to the CFO is, let's not make a decision to invest really big in something. Let's make staged investments, try something at a low level of investment, and we'll only continue to invest in it if we see it succeed by this metric and this metric.
Sometimes what we've sold it as is not fail fast, because in fact, the time value isn't understood. We just say fail small because it's a smaller investment. And that's the key. You're right. They can quantize the risk, and they can understand that there's a difference between risking, in different organizations, $100,000 or $1 million versus, $1 billion.
Yeah, it's so essentially I'm saying to the CFO, I'll give you two choices. Either you can commit to giving me $10 million and I'll give you a result in 2 years. That's option A. Or you can commit to giving me $10,000 and I'll give you the first result in a week, and then you can decide if you want to give me another $10,000. CFO, which of those options do you prefer? And, you know, I think anybody who's rational is going to prefer that staged investment approach. And then, you know, I can say, yeah, we call that fail fast.
I think there's also classes of failure, aren't there? There's failure like we wasted a bit of money, and there's failure like we leaked all the details of our customers to the internet. And I think it's important to distinguish between some failures are unacceptable for business and some are quite tolerable. But I wanted to get back to, you talked about the frozen middle there, Mark, and Barbara talked about the siloed group doing the agile thing while the rest of the business is as it was. And what I wanted to say was that, my feeling is that the frozen middle is the secret weapon of transformation. That if they are, as you say, incented in the right way, then they can actually be the powerhouse because they know all the stuff. They know how things are done or not done. So I wanted to ask a question of the panel. Should you go secret squirrel, separate organization and build out, or should you try and get the organization working alongside, working in a kind of lean, broad way together to make the change? Which is the better approach?
I'm just going to say depends. Yeah, I mean, that's a loaded question. Yeah, so simple answer, depends.
I've heard the phrase build new bank, but I've not seen it done. Other than someone acquiring through acquisition or something like that. But I haven't been party to that, but yeah.
I think
I have, and then it just becomes another, sorry, Kyle. You know, I've seen it where we in Canada acquire American banks all the time, and basically it's the mothership and then the bank that's been acquired. But ultimately, because each of the organizations has been built independently and we're now bringing them together, we've got more silos, is my observation.
The observation I was going to make, which I think draws from what Barbara's seen, is you can't be all one or the other. You have to do both. There have to be those teams that are out front, that are learning the lessons and, you know, let's say failing small and finding out what works and what doesn't work in an organization. But then you have to take those lessons and apply them to the rest of the organization, which may move a little slower. And that's okay. The thing you want to do is you want to protect the fast-moving organization from the organizational antibodies so that they don't become a target for the rest of the organization in terms of trying to take away their funding, trying to, you know, make them look bad, things like that. You want them to be understood as the ones who are out there to make some mistakes, learn some lessons, and bring those lessons back to the rest of the organization so that they can move more carefully.
And I think at this point, sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, just based on my experience, for 25 years, I've worked inside organizations, whether it be or consulting to organizations. It's only in the last 2.5 years that I've actually moved from an enterprise strategic role or a consulting role inside a technology organization. And the difference for me was astounding. And the reason it was astounding was that the cultural behaviors inside this organization I've never witnessed in my history before. So I partner with the Microsofts and the Amazons. The cultural behaviors of innovation, top down, are just understood. And it's so refreshing. It's like, I wish I would have encountered this 28 years ago, but I didn't. And it's brought me to where I am. So from the outside in, when I move into a customer that is a bank or a government, or now in a new role where I'm actually partnering with global channels to deliver services on a broader scale, The difference is fundamentally the top-down leadership cultures and behaviors that are innovation comes first. It's understood, it's received, and it's honestly, for me, it's mind-blowing. It really is. It's a whole different energy where you wake up every day and we really do look at the art of the possible. Okay, that's not working. All right, what can we do? What can we do to move this forward? And it's just a collaborative conversation from the engineers, from the business. We come together and we have the fierce conversations. So just an observation I'm sharing there.
Yeah, I'm glad I let you go first because you teed me up perfectly there. So I was going to say there. Well, first of all, there's sort of a nuance to this one in the sense that even just let's be technologists for a second. I'll forget I'm an executive. We believe in microservices and run what you build, and we believe in loose coupling, and those are good patterns. We know. We don't call it siloing, but that's what it is, right? It's a bunch of separate teams that have their own responsibilities. There's a difference between that and what we call siloing, obviously, because siloing is frustrating, and what I just said is not frustrating. So there's some interesting nuanced difference there. At Amazon, this is a really big thing for us. Everything is decentralized. Everything is based on 2 pizza teams. Teams that are small enough to be fed by 2 pizzas. And they are truly empowered and they generally work independently of each other. And that's one reason why they can innovate so fast. Now, of course, they're not working fully independently. There are those relationships, but you try to minimize them actually, because that's going to let you move faster. And the basis on which we do that, because I talk to executives all the time, I get a question right away, like, how do you control what they're doing if they're all empowered to do whatever they think is right? And the answer is that you have a shared set of principles. So we have our 14 leadership principles. They're thoroughly ingrained in everything we do. People are hired based on those 14 leadership principles. You get feedback based on those things. They're the basis of discussions constantly. There are things like customer obsession, bias for action, disagree and commit, all of which are more fleshed out in the actual principle. And we're so serious about those principles, I can trust any 2 pizza team to do the right thing because I know they're going to use those principles in making any decisions. And so I can fully trust them, even if they make a decision that wouldn't be the one that I would have made. It's a perfectly good decision because they've considered all those things. We also do this with team tenets. Each team has a set of principles it's going to use in making its own decisions. And those are published and anybody can argue with them or give feedback on them. But the team is going to be making decisions based on those principles. So again, you can trust them. So we structure very deliberately into a loosely coupled organization in order to foster that innovation and say, your job is you please the customers that you're facing, and that's it. You do that, and we're happy as long as you're following the 14 leadership principles.
And are they incented on those leadership principles?
It's the basis of absolutely everything. So
there you go. There you go.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's very serious. So
there you go.
When we interview people, our discussion on whether to hire them or not is based on those 14 principles. The annual feedback cycle is about those principles. If you are putting one of your employees up for a promotion, you're going to say how they are demonstrating those principles is absolutely ingrained in everything. And it's unusual, right? I've never seen this before.
But it works.
Works very well.
Yeah.
I should also say there are trade-offs, right? When you decide on 14 principles, you're deliberately deciding against all the other possible principles. So, for example, a great example in Amazon is bias for action. So we say, if you have a decision that's low risk, and we define low risk, we talk about two-way doors and one-way doors. A two-way door is if you go through the door, you can come back out again. One-way door, once you go through, you're stuck. So if you got a two-way door decision to make, just make it and move forward. And that, of course, makes us really fast and really innovative. It also means we're sometimes going to have duplication across the organization, right? Two different organizational units might bias for action on the same thing. And then you have duplication. And we say 2 is better than 0. You know, we're going to accept the duplication. And later on, we're going to try to find it and do something about it. But we're okay with the fact that we might have some duplication, because the result is we get more innovations out faster.
So I'm curious, Mark, you work in retail. Well, you're not in retail. That's not right. But you come from an organization whose DNA is retail. I think it's fair to say. How would that approach have worked? How could that approach be made to work in an organization like Homeland Security or immigration? Could it have worked?
Yes. No, it worked really well. The way that, so now I've learned a lot from being at Amazon, right? So I would do it differently if I went back to Homeland Security. I would focus a little more on those principles. But what you're really trying to do in, let's say, DevOps or other digital ways of working is you're establishing guardrails, and then you're saying move as fast as you want because the guardrails are there and they're enforced. So, you know, the teams that are doing your DevOps delivery, they have automated tests, and they have this automated security test suite, and we did automated performance testing and all kinds of other things. And we said, as long as you're passing your tests, you're probably good, so move as fast as you can. And in that way, the guardrails sort of substitute for the leadership principles. You know, they're making sure that nobody's going to go outside of the bounds that they're allowed to go. I've oversimplified a little bit on our security. You know, not all of it was automated. We had pen testing going on as well and other stuff like that. But so a good DevOps principle that I use a lot is, if you're afraid of something, do it more. And, you know, if you're afraid that your development teams are going to do bad stuff, put the appropriate guardrails in place and let them go faster, you know, because fear is not okay. If you're afraid to do a deployment, do more deployments and make sure, you know, that way you really test your deployment process, you make sure it works, and the fear starts to go away. So I think the principle is the same. You encourage autonomy and empowered teams, but you have the appropriate guardrails in place so that every decision they make is going to be a good one.
And by guardrails, how do you define a guardrail? Is it a piece of infrastructure, or is it a statement?
It's essentially, it's your controls, but it's not limited to security controls and compliance controls. You can put in place whatever guardrails you want, but they're automated. So, for example, you might put in place a guardrail that says, if somebody spins up something that's going to be a really expensive resource in the cloud, notify finance right away. You can do that kind of automation easily in the cloud. That's a guardrail. It's a loosely enforced one. Or you could say, if they try to spin up a resource that is costly, then just don't let them do it. That's a, you know, tightly enforced guardrail, let's say. And that's an example of a financial guardrail. You could say, if somebody tries to spin up an instance with an operating system that's not approved by security, don't let them do it. So there are all sorts of guardrails you can set up. The magic is to decide what's important to you that you want to enforce by guardrails. And then everything else becomes a management question. You know, the teams are moving fast. If they do something that's silly, their managers have to talk to them and say, why do you do that silly thing? You know, it's not prevented by a guardrail, but let's discuss what your values are and how you're making decisions.
Yeah, and there's this real tension. So building those guardrails is kind of a cost. And it kind of goes back to the front-loaded point I made earlier. And it implies that you need to have a significant investment in some sort of centralized infrastructure. but business leaders often look to the development teams for business value delivery and away from the infrastructure teams because they're seen as a cost and blockers, and because not everyone is joined up. And I don't know if I even have a question about that, but it's something.
Well, I think one way to rephrase something Mark said that I think we would all possibly agree to is it's a mindset change from infrastructure team to automation team. That's really at the heart of all of this, is really moving them away from the idea of thinking that they own infrastructure, however they define infrastructure, to knowing what they own is automation that enforces policies or that, you know, makes detections of violations of policies.
I'm going to use that, Carl, from tomorrow in my work. I think that's a really good point. Stop calling them infrastructure, start calling them automation. Yeah, I like that. I want to get to some of the questions that have been coming in from the chat. Someone said, I'd love to hear the panel's experience with digital transformation in non-software first companies, which raises the question, is banking a software first company, which we could cover as well, i.e. ones with a more traditional manufacturing background, e.g. automotive industry, I guess manufacturing or maybe even retail. Do we have much experience? I mean, Mark, I think you might have some experience outside.
Yeah. Well, the customers that I work with are basically the Global 2000 and big government agencies. So they're across all industries. To me, the interesting challenge is the traditional enterprises. So if a lot of you have financial services experience, I've worked with automotive companies and all sorts of others. The challenge is that generally these companies have figured out good ways to do things. That's why they're successful. That's why they are where they are today. And those good ways of doing things become locked up in their policies and their culture. And so when they're looking to make a big transformation, necessarily they're fighting themselves. You know, they're fighting to break out of what they're enforcing, essentially, because it's worked in the past. And that's fine. That's where that mindset shift has to happen. That's usually where I can help them rethink it. There are some special challenges when you have hardware involved, right? The amazing thing about these digital ways of working, DevOps, CI/CD, whatever, is that software is really malleable. You can make changes to it. You can work incrementally. You can get value really quickly. You can do this kind of automation of testing, all those wonderful things. Hardware isn't necessarily that way. So when you get close to hardware, you have to develop some tactics for how you're going to implement some of those DevOps principles when you're closer to hardware. Automotive is a funny example to choose because I'm not even sure that automotive is about hardware anymore. It's you know, increasingly about software. So we're generally working with automotive customers on things like predictive maintenance, supply chain management, the connected cloud for vehicles, things like that, in places where these digital things are a more exact fit, let's say. But I was working with a company recently that is very much a hardware company where their software is just there to drive the hardware. And we're working on tactics that they can use to, let's say, do automated testing. So, you know, when you seat this software in the hardware, you know what it's going to do, and things like that. So a lot of it is applicable, even if you are dealing with things that are not software.
And if you think about a lot of the problems that we've seen over the last year, in the end, even for traditional manufacturing companies, these were problems that had to be solved with software. If you think about the supply chain issues that we worked with, you know, coming up with new partners, new suppliers, hooking that into your supply chain, in the end, that's a contract and software issue more so than it is a hardware issue. And, you know, being able to embrace that kind of ability to change quickly is, I think, the real key at any type of industry, regardless, because, as Andreessen said, I think it was Andreessen, software is eating the world, and I don't think anyone is exempt from that.
Interesting, because I've also worked in a large global manufacturing company in the United States that was literally bleeding over the last several years. And so not only was it bleeding, not only was the organization having to mitigate risk big time. When we went inside the organization, it was about, in the supply chain, being able to take advantage of technology. Every piece of technology had been purchased, every piece of technology, but it was just sitting on a shelf while the organization was literally bleeding and grounded. And what was really interesting was that when we moved inside the organization and the chief technology officer had a plan, the operations had a plan, business had a plan, but when you got them all in the same room, it was the culture of that organization that was impeding them. They did not understand how to have conversations to come together. They were now panicked. They were all over the news, and they needed help, but they were in such a state of fear that they couldn't even listen to outside objective opinions. And so what we had to do was we had to go in and we had to convey, first of all, the implications of staying in this cultural zone and what needed to happen in order to move change forward. And then we had to create a very small task force, senior leadership task force, and create tiger teams. And in those tiger teams, we had to create, to your point, Mark, cultural behaviors and governance principles that would allow them to understand the technology that they had shelved, be enabled through cultural behaviors to stop the bleeding in this manufacturing company, to gain some, quote, control. And it's interesting because in banks, where it's all about the speed of the transaction, and fundamentally, people, a lot of people, organizations like banks, people are more interested in making money sometimes than caring about their own health. When you also move into the health vertical, I find that interesting. But in the manufacturing organization that I was working in, it really was the cultural behaviors that were prohibiting advancement and change. And it took a long time, and it is taking a long time, to move that change forward in a constructive way.
And what I've realized is that, this is normal, right? In the sense that culture forms around ways of succeeding. When people find a certain way of succeeding, then the culture reinforces that way of doing things and that way of thinking. And so whatever made the organization successful in the past, that's the way their culture is formed. And now if we're talking about a transformation, which is a big change, obviously the culture doesn't support it because it's not doing things that way. So I like to think of cultural change as an output of the transformation process. It can't be a prerequisite. You can't wait for the culture to change first before you start changing things. What you do is you change things, and then people see that there's a new way of succeeding, and then the culture gels around that. And this is just the way big organizations are, and it's very natural. But I think, as you pointed out, Barbara, that's you do it by you get one team doing things the right way, their culture changes, you get another team doing it, and then you use that for leverage to spread it across the organization.
I think there's definitely another 90 minutes in the mechanics of cultural change, but we're running out of time slightly. So I'd like to throw this open to people to ask any questions they'd like. If you want to unmute yourself and ask any questions or make any observations, now is your chance. I see Daniel Jones makes a point in the chat that I was thinking about that we've already been through this change in automotive manufacturing in the 60s and 70s, or how Toyota was over 100 years ago, wasn't it? But that change rippled through the automotive industry over many decades, from big monolithic production and then fixing at the end to iterative change at a smaller scope. And he makes the observation that Kanban and Lean come from the automotive world. So have we learned the lessons from there? I don't know. I don't know if we have. So I'm just waiting to see if anyone wants to ask questions. But if everyone's going to be shy, then I'm going to give it a few more seconds, and then call it a day. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. It was a lot of fun. I felt like there was a lot of stuff we could have explored. I wanted to talk about crisis and how that can drive change, but we're not going to have time to go into that. As I say, I'm sure there's another 90 minutes in some of the topics we touched on today. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for your questions in the chat, and thank you very much for attending. And till next time, goodbye.